Welcome you all to this class on sons and lovers. We are in chapter 4. In the previous chapter 1, 2, 3, we had the, you know, background of the novel. Not background exactly, background of, you can say, the life of Mr. and Mrs. Morrill. And at first we saw that they had two children, William and Annie, and later we saw that Paul, the third child, was born. And we also witnessed the breach and the, you know, misunderstanding between Mr. and Mrs. Morrill in their conjugal life. And we observed that their conjugal life was not sound, and I also said that there are some autobiographical elements in this novel that we will gradually discuss when we will proceed in this novel. Now, this chapter begins, chapter 4. Paul is already born, he's the third child. This chapter begins by describing the way that Paul, in the absence of William, bonded most closely with his sister Annie. Now, we have come to know that William got a job. He was engaged or involved in job much earlier in his life, and he left home. And in his absence, Paul became more attached to his sister Annie. She was a tomboy who played games with the other neighborhood children. So Annie was that kind of girl who used to play with boys of the locality. Sometimes you will see this sort of girl. And Paul would quietly tag along behind her, and Paul would also accompany her, his sister Annie. One day, while Annie's favorite doll is lying covered up on the sofa, Paul jumps off the sofa arm and lands on the doll. Annie is very upset, but her brother is perhaps more upset at her grief. So one day, accidentally, Paul destroys one of the dolls of his sister Annie, and his sister becomes very upset. And watching his sister getting upset, Paul himself became very upset, and he was grief stricken. So these episodes simply indicate the way at that time the children used to grow up in England, and in the lower class society, in the society like miners and working class people, let's say rather working class people instead of lower class. A few days later, Paul suggests that they make a sacrifice of the doll and they burn and smash its remains. So it's a kind of ritual done to the doll. Now, this is also common phenomenon among the children, not only in England but across the world. That the rituals of the dolls, are always very common were common. It's not common nowadays because new entertainments and new types of games have emerged, replacing all these traditional games. One evening, when Paul comes home, he finds his father and older brother in the midst of an argument, which only fails to come to blows because of Mrs. Morrill's intervention. So, when William stays at home sometimes, and we see in one case that there is a misunderstanding between and a kind of quarrel that emerged between William and his father. So this is very frustrating that the understanding or the terms between the father and the elder, son is not good. The family moves out of the bottoms into a house with an ash tree, uh, which makes noise when the wind blows through it. Morel likes it, but the children hate it. So they again shift their home and they go to another place, and which is not liked by the children because in that place there is a kind of sound or noise of the air. Morel still comes home late and drunk most nights, and Paul begins to worry because his mother is worrying about his father. So the habit of drinking still continues with Mr. Morel, and he comes late at night. And Paul now starts, realizing the pains and pathos of his mother. One night he goes out to play, then at night anxiously runs into the kitchen to check on his mother. When he finds that his father has not come, he goes to visit Mrs. Inger, who lives two doors down and has no children of her own. He talks to her for a while, then goes home. So these are, the way the children are spending their time and the family is spending its time. When Morel finally does come home, he is usually rude and irritable. So that is the character of the father, I mean Mr. Morel. So whenever he returns from his job, and obviously after spending some time in the bar, his attitude remains very rude and irritable. During this time period, he becomes more and more shut out from the family affairs, as the children begin to tell their mother everything and their father nothing. So there is a kind of situation in the house that the father is getting alienated day by day. So the family affairs are often discussed between the mother and the children, and the father stays aloof. He remains absent in all those issues. And the children, whenever they face any problem or whenever they have anything to share, they share it with their mother, and they completely ignore their father because their father himself has destroyed the possibility of good relationship. This is illustrated by the example of Paul's prize, which his mother convinces him to tell his father about. During their conversation, it becomes apparent that Morel is an outsider in his own family. So one day, Paul got a prize, and when he, showed this to his mother said that asked him to show this to his father, but Paul was unwilling. And these incidents, these episodes, very simple episodes, but these episodes give us a clear idea that Mr. Morel, the minor and the supposed guardian of this family, is getting outsider day by day in his own family because nobody is sharing their thoughts and sentiments with him, and he is getting alienated. The next part of the nation, however, describes the times of happiness between Morel and his children. When he is happily engrossed in his work, he gets along well with his children. He tells stories like the ones about Taffy and the horse. On these nights, when Morel has some job to do, he goes to bed early, and the children feel secure when he is in bed. But sometimes we see that Mr. Morel tells some stories to his children when he is in his jovial mood, in his happy mood. But a situation is like this, that the children gradually they lose their interest in their father, and they rather prefer their father to stay, to go to bed instead of having conversation with them. So this becomes the reality with the children. Now, chapter 5, the title of the chapter is Paul Launches into Life. So, Paul is growing up, and Paul is the protagonist of this novel and main character of this novel. And through Paul, many things will be discussed. And through Paul, Paul is obviously the protagonist of this modern novel. And through Paul, the complex relationship between, son and mother, son and lover will be delineated. So that is basically the main focal point of this novel, that how a man or how a lover or how a boy gets twisted between his sentiments that he shares for his mother and the sentiments he shares for his lovers. How his relationship with his lover is influenced by his relationship with his mother. So this is very complex, and I said at the beginning that there must be some interpretation, in terms of Freudian psychoanalytic study. Morel is injured at work when a piece of rock falls on his leg. So in one incident, Mr. Morel becomes, injured because a rock. He works in the mine, so a rock falls on his leg. When Mrs. Morel gets the news, she is very flustered while she is preparing to go to the hospital to see him. Paul calms her down and gives her some tea, and she leaves for the hospital. So, after listening to or hearing this news, I mean bad news, Mrs. Morel wants to go to the hospital. Paul prepares some tea for his mother. After having tea, she goes to the hospital. When she returns, she tells the children that their father's leg is injured rather badly. And when she returns from her visit to the hospital, when she comes to her house, she informs her children that their father, is badly injured, and the injury is not simple or ordinary. They all feel anxious but are comforted by the fact that her father is a strong healer, or their father is a strong healer. They become upset, but all they know that their father has got a very strong immunity system, and he will heal, very soon. Mrs. Morel feels somewhat guilty because she no longer loves her husband. Now, this is the inward world of Mrs. Morel. This is the internal world of Mrs. Morel. And there is a kind of conscience, guilty conscience working in her. And she thinks that she is, responsible, and she is guilty, and because she doesn't love him anymore. While she is sorry for his pain and his injury, she still feels an emotional emptiness. She is feeling sorry for the pain and injury of her husband. But there is something within Mrs. Morel which is, I mean, not conscious, the emotions have emptied. There is no emotion, hardly there is any emotion left in her heart, in her mind for her husband. So it's an issue of emotional emptiness for the husband. So when emotions are absent, love is absent, the feelings are absent. This is, shocking for the, for Mrs. Morel herself, and she thinks that she considers herself to be guilty for not having emotional bondage with her husband, because she doesn't feel that much emotions for her husband. She is somewhat comforted by talking to Paul, who is able to share her troubles. Now, this is very interesting. Failing to, find a kind of shelter in Mr. Morel, or failing to share pains, sufferings, or emotional, issues with her husband, or Mrs. Morel, she resorts to her children. She rather starts depending on her children. So it's a kind of shifting of emotion. It's a kind of shifting of dependence. It's the kind of shifting of relationship. It's the kind of shifting of, sharing from husband to children. She expresses quite clearly that she doesn't have that much feelings for her husband, and she is gradually leaning towards her children, and basically towards, William, and after that towards Paul. True to his nature, Morel does recover, and the family is very happy and peaceful while he is still in the hospital, almost to the point of regretting that he will soon return. Now, this is again very shocking and significant, because the family members are very happy to know that Mr. Morel is recovering very fast. So that's an issue to be happy for the family members. But at the same time, they are shocked to some extent that when he will recover fully, he will return home. So they rather expect their father to stay at the hospital a few more time. So this is really shocking about the relationship between Mr. Morel and the family members. So, and this is reality as well. When there will be a kind of lack of relationship between family members, and the family members will subconsciously expect the person whom they dislike to stay away from home. Paul is now 14, so Paul has grown up, and it is time for him to find a job. And in England, it was a tradition for the working class people to find out jobs in the teens. So Paul is ready to find out job. Every day, his mother sends him to the cooperative reading room to read the job advertisements in the paper. So, what her mother does, her mother sends the child to the reading room of, cooperative reading room to read the job advertisements in the paper. This makes him miserable, but he dutifully writes down a few offers and brings them home. But he writes the letters, he writes the applications, though it's boring. And after doing that, he returns home. He makes applications for several jobs using a variation on a letter that William had written. So he takes, the letters of Williams that William once used to write to different uh, offices for jobs, and he just makes some changes in those letters and sends them. He is summoned to call on Thomas Jordan, a manufacturer of surgical appliances, and his mother is overjoyed. So at one point, he is, summoned by one of the companies, and the name of the company is Thomas Jordan, and it's a manufacturing company of surgical appliances. I mean, medical appliances, and his mother is overjoyed, and the mother becomes very happy. Paul and Mrs. Morel travel to Nottingham one Tuesday morning to respond to the invitation. So Paul goes to respond to the letter, and Paul is accompanied by his mother. Paul suffers the whole way there, dreading the interview and the necessity of being scrutinized by strangers. So Paul is to some extent nervous, and he thinks that he will be, scrutinized by the strangers. He will be scrutinized by people in the interview board. So during the actual interview, Mr. Jordan asks Paul to read a letter in French, and he has trouble reading the handwriting, becomes flustered, and continually insists that dots means fingers, although in this case it refers to the toes of a pair of stockings. Nevertheless, he is hired as a junior spiral plant. So what it indicates that when Mr. Jordan takes the interview, he asked Paul to read some French, but Paul was not that much comfortable, and he was making mistakes. Still, even after that, he was hired as junior spiral clerk in the office. After the interview, Paul and his mother have dinner in an eating house, where it turns out that the food is more expensive than they realized. So after the interview, what happens? Paul and his mother, they go to the hotel. They have their food, and they finally realize that what they thought the price was higher than their anticipation. They ordered the cheapest dish possible. They ordered the cheapest dish. After dinner, they wander around the town, look at some shops, and buy a few things. Paul is happy with his mother. Now, remember, look, this is very important part of the novel. So Paul was, going to the markets. Paul and his mother, they were buying things, and Paul is enjoying his time with his mother. So the way they spent time in different shops, in the hotel, I mean, in the restaurant, in different shops, in buying things and doing this and that. The son was feeling very comfortable with mother, and the mother was also feeling very comfortable with son. The father is missing. So that's exactly what I was trying to make you understand, that the position of the father has been replaced by the son. So the father has become an outsider in the family, and what was expected from the father is being fulfilled by the son, and the mother is now completely dependent on her son. So this is very interesting part, and this is Freudian psychology. The relationship between mother and sons, and it is known as Oedipus complex as well, that they are feeling comfortable with each other. The next day, he applies for a season ticket for the train. When he returns and tells his mother how much it will cost, he says that she wishes William would send them some money to help pay for things like the ticket. So Paul next day tells his mother that he will have journey from his home, but he says that he has also bought a seasonal ticket. That means ticket for the whole month or fortnight, and he also tells his mother that how much it will cost, and the mother hopes that William will send some money so that they can meet these necessities. Meanwhile, William is becoming a gentleman in London and is beginning to see a girl, Lily Dennis Weston, whom he calls Gypsy. He asks her for a photograph to send to his mother, and when the photo comes, it shows her with a bare shoulders. Mrs. Morel comments to William that she does not think the photo is appropriate. And the girl sends another one in which she is wearing an evening gown. Mrs. Morel is still not impressed. So by this time, this is again very significant. William is becoming a gentleman in London. So he is growing up. And naturally, when he is growing up, he is having friendship with girls. And he develops a kind of friendship or affair with a girl whose name is Gypsy. And he sends a picture, of Gypsy to his mother. And the picture, the first picture was disliked by the mother, Mrs. Morel, because the shoulder of, Gypsy was bare, it was open. So the mother didn't like it. So again, another picture was sent to Mrs. Morel in which the girl was wearing a night gown, an evening gown, and still this is again not liked by Mrs. Morel. She is not impressed. But the reason why she is not impressed is still unclear. So there is something working in Mrs. Morel's mind, and this is working basically in the subconscious mind. She is dependent on William. William is her son, eldest son. She is again dependent on Paul, her son. So this dependence she has developed because of her separation. I don't mean separation in the traditional term. It's not divorce, but it's psychological divorce. It's psychological separation with her husband. So as she got separated psychologically from her husband, she developed this kind of integration in terms of psychological relationship with her two children. Both William and Paul. So this relationship between mother and sons, it gradually developed, and we will see now this complex relationship, that how these two sons, William and Paul, they will be in a dwindling situation between their relationship with mother and lover. And as I said earlier, that the relationship with the lover is being influenced by the relationship with the mother, and how much you will gradually come to know afterwards. Now let's go to chapter 6. Death in the family. This is an important chapter. We will see death in the family. This is tragic. This chapter begins with a description of Arthur and tells how, as he grows older, he comes to detest his father. So this is the fourth child. So how Arthur at the beginning, Arthur showed some tendency to his father, but as he grew older, he again started hating his father. All of the children follow the same trend until they all loathe him. So all the children of the family, all these children, they started loathing, the father. Arthur wins a scholarship to the school in Nottingham, and his mother decides to let him live in town with one of her sisters because of his adversarial relationship with his father. So what happens? That Arthur gets a scholarship in Nottingham, and Mrs. Morel wants Arthur to go to Nottingham and stay in her sister's house, and for two reasons. One is the study purpose, and the other is that Arthur's relationship with his father is getting violent day by day. So Mrs. Morel wants to avoid this violent relationship. Annie is a teacher in the board school, and Annie, by this time, she has become a teacher, and Mrs. Morel clings to Paul. Now you see that William is already outside of home, and Arthur is going to Nottingham, and Annie is a teacher in a board school or boarding school, so she's also staying away. So who is staying with the mother is only Paul, and we will now see that Mrs. Morel will gradually be completely dependent on Paul. William becomes engaged to the girl, as we have already come to know that William has a relationship with Gypsy, the nickname, and decides to bring her home at Christmas. And so he decided to bring the girl home at Christmas. She comes home with him and puts on airs of high station, treating Annie like a servant. But the girl is not liked by the family members, as when Gypsy came, I mean the girl with whom William developed his relationship, Gypsy is the name of the girl. So Gypsy treated Annie almost like a servant. So it was irritating for the family members. William begins to be annoyed with the way that she acts much grander than his family. And he tells his mother that he only feels fond of the girl when he is around her in the evenings, otherwise, he has no feelings for her. Now, William himself is upset and he tells his mother that, Mother, now I realize that when I stay the evenings with the girl, I feel okay. Otherwise, in other times of the day, in other hours of the day, I don't find that much interest in the girl. So it's probably a kind of complete physical relationship, and the mental or the psychological, communion is completely absent. And William himself is frustrated watching Gypsy's attitude towards the family members, basically towards Annie. And this is also shocking for all the family members and basically shocking for William and mother. So, William, you must have noticed one more thing, that William is sharing his feelings with his mother openly. So, this is also very significant. Paul has Monday afternoons off from work, and one Monday his mother tells him that they have been invited to see Mr. Lavers on his new farm. So this is a turning point in the novel again. By this time, we have seen that William is in love with Gypsy, and now we will see that the you know the possibility of getting relationship in Paul's life is arriving. They decide to go that afternoon. They have a nice walk through the countryside on the way there, and they are then are welcomed and given a tour of the farm when they arrive. The labor's boys show Paul how to make the chicken eat out of his hand, and they tease their sister Miriam because she is afraid to try. Paul later finds her shyly reaching her hand towards the chicken and helps her to let it out of her hand. So the labor's family, when Paul and his mother visits the family, when they visit the family, the laborers they go to the through the country road, and they are in the natural surroundings. When they reach the house, they are taken to the farm, and after reaching the farm, after going to the farm, the laborers boys, they show the skill of feeding the chicken from their own hand. And they had a sister whose name is Miriam. Miriam was very shy to let the chicken eat from her own, palm. And Paul, when he realized that the girl was very shy, he went close to her and helped her to let the chicken eat from her arm. So this is the first time we see that Paul is mixing with a girl. The next time, by this time, Paul visits the house of Lavers, and Paul's first visit with Miriam is very interesting and significant. And by this time, William brings his fiancée again home. We already know that William brought, Gypsy home a few days back. Again, second time he brings her home. She once again annoys him and the rest of his family with her attitude towards his sister. But there is no change in Gypsy, the girlfriend of William. She is again very harsh and cruel to the family members of William. He begins to ridicule her in front of others and discusses with his mother that he no longer really wants to marry her. So now, this time, William loses his temper, and he starts ridiculing, Gypsy in front of other family members as well, and discusses with his mother that he no longer really wants to marry her. And now he tells his mother that I don't want to marry this girl, but feels that he has gone on too long to break it off now. But he feels that his relationship with Gypsy has gone too far to stop it. Probably he is indicating his physical relationship with Gypsy. But he doesn't like Gypsy right now, or he doesn't love Gypsy anymore. He comes home again alone the first weekend in October. Next time, when he comes home, he comes alone. And his mother notices that he has not been well. And this time, mother notices that William is not well physically. The Tuesday morning after his return, Mrs. Noel gets a telegram saying that he is ill. William goes back, and she receives a telegram from William afterwards. She takes the train to London, arrives at William's lodging, and stays with him until he dies late that night. So this is very shocking. So Mrs. Morel goes to London, and goes to the lodging of William, and on her lap, her eldest son William dies. Very shocking. She sends a telegram for Morel to come to London, and when it arrives, Paul has to go to the mine to fetch his father. So Mrs. Morel sends a telegram home to ask her husband to come to uh, London, and Paul receives the telegram and goes to the mine. Morel goes to London, and Mr. and Mrs. Morel return on Saturday night. So after the burial, they come back home on Saturday night. After William's death, Mrs. Morel becomes shut off until one day Paul falls ill with pneumonia. So, what happens that after William's death, Mrs. Morel becomes fully depressed, and she shuts herself off from everything. She is so much dejected, she is so much depressed that she loses her interest in life. But she, to her horror, finds that her another son, Paul, becomes ill. So a kind of phobia starts working in her mind. A kind of fear starts working in her mind. That is she going to lose another son, Paul? She almost loses him as well, but he somehow pulls through, and Mrs. Morel's life now rooted itself in Paul. Paul was almost, gone. Paul almost died. But fortunately, he survived. And Mrs. Morel now doesn't want to lose Paul at any cost because she lost William, her eldest son, and Paul was being almost lost. He somehow survived. So Mrs. Morel now is fully dependent on Paul, and she does not want to let Paul go anywhere. So this dependence on Paul is going to be very crucial, in our analysis of sons and lovers. So we have already seen that Paul meets Miriam, and chapter 7 starts with lad and girl love. That means one love affair is already vanished because William died, and we saw that the relationship between William and Gypsy was finally it was not a good one, and with the death of William, the chapter is closed. I mean, we are also closing the discussion. About the affair between William and Gypsy. Now we are going to Paul, and Paul is the protagonist of this novel. And since Paul is the protagonist, you will see some light of D.H. Lawrence's own life in Paul, some reflection of Lawrence's own life in Paul. And Miriam, I hope that you can remember in the previous chapter, in the Laver's house, when they went, the mother and Paul, they met the children and Miriam. This chapter describes the growing intimacy between Paul and Miriam. So Paul again visits the house, and we see a kind of intimacy develops between Paul and Miriam. It begins from Miriam's perspective and describes the way that she aspires to learning since she cannot have pride in her social status. So Miriam is not at all proud. She is a very simple girl. She is a very ordinary girl. She is the girl of nature. She is interested in Paul but scorns him because he only sees the swine girl side of her and not the princess she believes she is inside. So she is interested in Paul, but she says that Paul does not have the inside of Miriam's character. When he falls ill, she feels like he would be weaker than she, and that if she could take care of him, she would love him deeply. So when Paul was ill, Miriam had a kind of sentiment, a very traditional sentiment among some of the girls, so that she could take care of Paul, and that's how she could start loving him. Paul enjoys visiting the laborer's farm because it is so different from his own home. So Paul also starts enjoying his time with Miriam. But remember one thing, Miriam is a girl of nature. Nature in what sense? Nature in spiritual form, not in physical form. Miriam and her mother both have very strong religious and spiritual convictions. And Miriam is a religious girl, and Miriam is a spiritual girl. Spiritual means that the soul is very important for them, not the body. On the other hand, Paul is a boy who is in his teens or just has crossed teens, and this strikes Paul as enormously different from his own mother's logical manner. And Paul finds a kind of difference between Paul's mother and Miriam's mother. Paul's mother is guided by reasons and logic. On the other hand, she observes that Miriam's mother, they are guided by spirit and religious belief. you know, One evening when he is there for dinner, the boys all become very upset with Miriam because the potatoes are burned. So one evening when Paul was in the house of laborers, the brothers or other boys of the house, they were very frustrated with Miriam because by mistake Miriam had burned the potatoes. Her mother reprimands her for answering them instead of turning the other cheek, and Paul is puzzled why an insignificant matter like potatoes would cause such conflict. So Miriam was trying to give answer that why she had burned the potatoes, and the mother also, Miriam's mother, reprimands or scolds Miriam. And Paul is to some extent irritated, not irritated, he is frustrated that why a silly issue like burning potato should cause so much chaos in the family. Miriam and Paul make their connection through nature. Try to understand. Miriam and Paul make their connection through nature. This is Wordsworthian nature from Miriam's point of view, and this is Keatsian nature from Paul's point of view. So Miriam looks at nature through her spiritual eyes, and Paul looks at nature from his sensual eyes, with his sensual eyes. As they share the experience of looking at a bird's nest, so when they look at a bird's nest, Miriam looks at it from her spiritual point of view, and Paul looks at it from his physical point of view. The narrator tells us, though, that it's a long time before Paul really notices Miriam. He first becomes friends with the boys, most of all Edgar. Then one day Miriam shows him the swing they have in the cowshed, and they slowly grow closer. So Miriam and Paul, they get closer after going to the swing. Paul is troubled by her intensity, without which would leave no emotion on a normal plane. She tells him of her desire to learn, and he agrees to teach her algebra. They are both frustrated by the effort, and Paul finds her simultaneously infuriating and attractive. So Paul starts teaching algebra to Miriam, and Paul's attitude to Miriam is quite interesting, and it's remarked by D.H. Lawrence, infuriating and attractive. Sometimes Paul is infuriated with Miriam, and sometimes he is attracted to Miriam. So the problem between uh, Paul and Miriam is, I have already mentioned that Miriam is a girl of spirit, and Paul is, since he is a boy of senses, the connection is not developing. One evening when Paul and Miriam are walking home, she brings him into the woods to see a particular bush because she wants to share it with him. So one evening when Miriam and Paul, they are walking back home, Miriam took Paul to a bush, and she wanted to show this to Paul. This excursion causes him to be late coming home, and his mother is unhappy with him, partly because she is not fond of Miriam. They argue about his relationship with the girl, and he insists that they are not courting. Again, very interesting. One in one such incident, when Paul returns home, the mother of Paul is not happy, and the mother is not also happy with Miriam because the mother doesn't like Miriam. Why she doesn't like Miriam, it's not clear. Because Gypsy was one type of girl, and Gypsy was audacious, Gypsy was arrogant, Gypsy was insulting. So there were reasons to dislike Gypsy. I mean, William's girlfriend, but Miriam is very gentle, and she doesn't share any of the rude characteristics or qualities of Gypsy. But still, she is disliked by the mother of Paul. So what are the reasons of these dislikings? So these are the things that we need to unfold. So when I will start my next class, I will start with these things. And they argue about his relationship with the girl, and he insists that they are not courting. And the mother is against Miriam. And finally, Paul says that I am not having any relationship with Miriam. The relationship has not started yet. Paul organizes a walk to a hemlock stone on Good Friday. During this walk, Miriam notices that Paul is different when she is alone with him. On the way back, she comes upon him in the road trying to fix his umbrella so his mother will not be upset, and she realizes that she loves him. When they were returning, she comes upon him alone in the road trying to fix his umbrella so his mother will not be upset, and she realizes that she loves him. So she was trying to fix the umbrella. But what is interesting over here at the end of this chapter, that Miriam finally realizes that she loves Paul. So what kind of love is this? How far this love affair can be extended? So what is love from Paul's point of view? What is love from Miriam's point of view? Why Mrs. Morel doesn't like this relationship again, though Miriam is a good girl, virtuous girl, are things to be discussed minutely, with which we will start our next class. So thank you very much for today's class.